Well, we are back, and we have Trevor Tyson here with us. We are so happy to have you here, Trevor. Thanks for coming on. Most of you may know him Instagram, Trevor Talks. If you know that, it is an awesome follow, so please go follow him on that. Trevor, welcome. Nice to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me, Nathan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Where do we find you? Are you down in Social Circle?
I'm in Social Circle, Georgia. I'm in a tiny town similar to y'all's. We have one stoplight, barely anywhere to eat. We have to go to the next town over. There's no movie theaters or anything. So I'm in the boondocks, but God's been faithful, and I've found myself in big cities up until the pandemic. But
yeah,
it's a real time for everybody.
Yeah, this has definitely been something absolutely crazy for all of us. So
yeah,
but we're happy to have you. And Trevor, you have an amazing story with what God is doing in your life. So if you don't mind, I would just love for you to just tell us a little bit about yourself and what all you do.
Yeah, so my name is Trevor Tyson. I grew up in the small town of Social Circle. And at this point in my life, I'm 22 years old and I tour for a living. God's been really faithful with taking me out of almost a broken piece of my life. I was struggling with depression, anxiety, towards the tail end of my senior year of high school. And I just quit doing all of the speaking engagements and podcasting interviews. I just quit Trevor Talks completely my senior year of high school because I was on tour and I had my first panic attack. And from that panic attack, it obviously took me off the road. And with me being off the road, that's my favorite thing to do, being around people, being around concerts, and just I'm fed off of that energy. So with that came anxiety and depression on a more larger scale. And it took 2 years of my life for me to accept that, okay, I need to go to therapy. I need to change my lifestyle, because when I fell into that pit of depression, I found all of my success and everything in AT&T. I was the #1 sales rep in the US, then became the #1 manager in the US for AT&T Mobility. And it was a great financial standpoint from looking at it. I was able to purchase my first house at 19, and I was just like, car, house, money, but I wasn't happy.
Yeah.
So I walked away from it all. I would say early last year, I think it was February 1st, I walked away from it all and started pursuing Trevor Talks and Fear is a Liar, which is my clothing brand that benefits mental health. And God's just been blowing my mind lately with all of that. And it's not even about the touring or selling merchandise. It's really just about telling people about Jesus and using a unique way to do it. You don't see very many clothing brands with like Fear is a Liar on it. And just giving you the truth and that you can overcome your mental health and you're stronger than your symptoms. Just because you're struggling with anxiety right now doesn't mean that you're not going to be struggling tomorrow. You have to give tomorrow a chance and live another day. So it's a simple message. Jesus changes everything. And just because you're from a tiny town doesn't mean you can't do big things. And I take pride in knowing that God did that with me. It wasn't anything I did. He gave me the determination and the work ethic to get out there and do it. And I think any of the people in your church can do the same thing.
Awesome. Let me ask you that. Have you found that there's been more of an openness, especially when it concerns, mental health or anxiety or depression or anything like that? And turning their life over to God. Have there been any kind of struggles with that for you? Have you seen openness that people are willing to let God in and let God do a work in their life when it comes to their mental health?
Yeah, I would say even more so in the live event spectrum, people just being more open with talking about anxiety, even pastors, youth pastors. It used to be this taboo thing that was like, if you're struggling with mental health, your faith isn't good enough. And that's simply just not a fact. Just like people are getting coronavirus right now, anybody can struggle with depression. You're not immune to depression. You're not immune to anxiety. And you need to take that just as serious as you do when you get the flu or the coronavirus. It's the silent killer. It's depression. I had a friend, Jared Wilson, who was a global pastor, lost his battle with suicide last year and left his wife and his kids behind. And, there were no warning signs for that for anybody. There wasn't anything we could have done because nobody really knew the extent of what he was going through. And he was very outspoken about mental health on a global platform. He was on staff with Greg Laurie's church out in California. And it was a global thing. and CNN and everybody put headlines up, the global church pastor dies by suicide. Like they buttered it up to be like,
Of course.
Christians are praising a false God, but that's simply not a fact. God can change anyone's life, but you can also struggle with things, but you have to know where to find your healing.
Yeah, I think that's been a big thing is the perception that just because you're a Christian, it means that you shouldn't have any kind of depression or
Yeah,
anxiety or anything like that. And I think we're finally getting to that point to where we can move past that and see that people are still going to struggle with that, and that's okay.
sure.
But it doesn't mean that your faith in God is wavering just because of
Yeah.
that. And I think that's a big breakthrough that we're starting to see in the churches now
Yeah.
because of that. So, well, let me ask you this, and just for students, my students who may be watching this after the fact, but when it comes to doubting their faith, because of something like this, because a lot of times that's where this comes in. Is they, like I said, it's silent. They're doing this at home in their rooms. They're not out, let's say, and look at me, I'm depressed.
Yeah.
They're doing this on their own, and that's where you're going to struggle with your faith. So how would you encourage them in that time where they are alone, when they're not, hey, I don't want to be around other people. I don't want to be with people right now. I don't, just let me be in my little corner of where I need to be right now with my struggles. And I know that's where faith gets tested a lot. That's where we think that our faith is lacking. And with those scars that come with that, how would you encourage them to still put their faith and trust in God at that time?
Yeah, when you're struggling and you're at home, I can totally understand. I was in high school. I graduated in 2016. When I started struggling with anxiety and depression, I didn't let my parents know. I didn't want to talk about it because I was ashamed of it. But as I get older, and I'm still a kid compared to everyone else in
To
the
me,
field,
yeah, that's all right.
but it's definitely hard to talk to your parents about stuff like that. And I know for a fact, like when you isolate yourself, you're kind of just feeding into that anxiety and depression. So one recommendation I would have is don't isolate yourself, whether you're on FaceTime with a friend, texting them, even opening up to your parents. Don't isolate yourself, and don't allow yourself to become almost like, if you're a serious extrovert or even if you're an introvert, don't allow yourself to isolate yourself too much, because I found myself dealing with agoraphobia, which is where you don't want to be around people. You don't want to leave your house. Like it's almost a fear at that point.
Yes.
Don't allow yourself to get to that point. If you find symptoms of anxiety or depression brewing inside of you, get help immediately. I use an app called BetterHelp, which I use like on my phone. With being on tour, I can't get to therapy all the time. So being able to FaceTime with my therapists and just talk through things that you don't necessarily want to talk through with friends and family, it's totally okay. There's nothing to be ashamed of. And that's been very crucial for me, because sometimes like it doesn't matter how strong you think you are. It doesn't matter how people look at you, whether they look at you as someone they look up to or someone that's just out there making music or whatever. You do need somebody to talk to. And if you don't know somebody who you could talk to, whether it's your youth pastor, your parents, or a therapist, reach out to a friend. But if you are struggling with depression or suicidal thoughts and even anxiety, anything like that, don't keep it to yourself. That's asking for trouble. I can tell you, as someone who wasted 2 years of my life working in corporate America, it will drag you down and it's not going to satisfy you.
Yeah. Yeah. I can attest to that quite a bit. So, thank you. To me, that's one of the biggest things. I think that, is I think they have to keep it to themselves. And there are plenty of people out there, that are just good ears.
Yeah.
They don't have to have all the advice in the world. They're just a good ear to listen and to hear what you have to say.